It's great to be here, and it's really exciting to talk to you about our Agile journey. And I just have to, on a personal note, this is just about 15 minutes ago, I did a 5-minute comedy routine for the first time in my life. So I'm all joked out, and you're going to have to suffer the consequences, which is this is going to be a little more dry. But anyways, let's talk about our Agile journey here a little bit. So who is Simply Business? We're an online insurance broker with around 750,000 micro business customers covering over 1,000 types of business. Our core disruption is serving customers who've been forgotten by time-pressed insurance agents who basically they don't make enough money for them, so that it's not worth it for people to interact with them. The opportunity that we're facing, and I'll try to keep this quick because you're probably not that interested in Simply Business to tell you all about all the great things we do, but the small business space accounts for about 99% of all UK and US businesses and has a really large outsized impact of around 1.9 trillion annual revenue in the UK and about 8.3 trillion annual revenue in the US. That's their revenue, not our revenue. We won the Sunday Times 100 Best Companies to Work For 2 years on the trot, and then focused ourselves on becoming B Corp certified, which is really about, caring for the environment, for the community, for employees and customers, as well as the bottom line. So a really great way for us to show our values and commitment to the broader area. But in general, we have an award-winning culture. And we exited to Travelers Insurance in one of the biggest insurtech exits in 2017, and have been working happily under their umbrella for the last 3 years. And who am I? I'm the group CTO, and I've been at Simply Business for more than 10 years, doing Agile, doing continuous integration, continuous delivery, and a number of other things. I'm also the chairman of Zensurance, which is a similar company to Simply Business that operates in Canada. I've been doing lean startup-like techniques for well more than a decade, which is kind of the business version of Agile in my view, and currently focused quite heavily on architecture, innovation, and strategy, and where those things inhibit us or block our ability to get things done. So the first thing I want to talk about is culture is key. The customer is your best insight. They are, and how does that connect to culture? Well, a culture of understanding customers, that's the key there. Trust is really important in your people. Hire great people, give them trust, but also expect them to experiment, expect them to use data to justify that trust. So that's why you trust them. As a manager, there's a real factor of giving up control. People call it moving from management to leadership, rather than trying to manage and move all the widgets around the board is maybe one model of management. It's really about giving up that control and letting others run with things. I would also say that culture is hard. You're never done improving. And, it's really important. Let me talk a little more about you're never done improving. What that means is that your company is probably changing and growing, and the environment around it is changing, and you have to adjust your culture to stay up to that. And then moving from fixed forecasts to hypotheses and tests is a really important part of that culture change that we went through. And I'll go further. So I just want to talk about these stages of our journey, where the first stage was Agile, probably in the proper do Agile point of view. We then replatformed, moved into lean startup approach, became more customer centric, moved into a product org approach, went international. We're now in the US and the UK, are working on scaling that out and really focused now on repeatable innovation. And from my perspective, all of those are components of being Agile, in the sense that's greater than just the software that's delivered using Scrum or Kanban or another methodology. And by the way, some of these things overlapped, and I haven't put really hard timelines on this, but the story starts in 2010 and has continued over the last 10 years in constant innovation change in how we operate. So the first thing I want to talk about is our shift to Agile. And that generated a 4x speed up on our delivery speed. We moved from monthly to weekly releases. We went from 2-week to 1-week test cycles where we were doing 1 week development, 1 week of test, 1 week of development, 1 week of test that overlapped. So we sort of had a overlapping model. We focused a lot on test automation so that we could deliver that quickly. In that period, we piloted our first Agile team, and it took us from 3 months to getting the whole team using Agile from our pilot team. So it was immediately effective. And then 9 months until the whole company went to being Agile. And there are a few things that we had to deal with. So one of the interesting things was teams actually felt scared to make decisions because they felt that their future selves might not choose to go back on them, which is, it's an interesting thing, but there was this fear of, and Google talks about this sometimes as one-way and two-way doors. So in the early stages, our teams felt they were going through a one-way door, a door that you can only go through one way and you can't come back, when in fact they were going through a two-way door, go through, see if we like this way of working better. If we don't, we go back to the way we did it before. And so that was an interesting one. We replaced all of our development environments because they simply didn't support speed of development. At the time, it could take up to 5 minutes for copy and paste. I mean, it was crazy when I joined in. There was no plan B. I came in and I knew that we needed to do this. So we went in, feet first with no plan to do any other method. We were going Agile. In that period, we started show and tell and iteration planning. The team wasn't that big, so that could be the entire team and actually the entire company coming in and seeing demos and tells of what we built and planning for the next iteration. We moved to Kanban. During that process, we hired a consultancy to help us get there. I was the person with Agile experience, and it was going to be more than enough. I was more than I could do by myself. And at that same time, we also had a heated discussion about hours worked. And the one way to think of it is if your best case productivity improvement, if you work more hours, typically if you go from 8 to 10 hours, could be somewhere in the order of 20%. But it probably would be much less because people are tireder. We got 400% increase in productivity through using a different methodology through working more effectively. So keep that in mind when, often your stakeholders might be talking about, oh, couldn't you get people to work a bit harder? They're just not working hard enough. Well, that's not the way to get 4x speed ups. Next, we replatformed. This was another 4x speed up and was, again, so now we're at a 16x speed up. So we had a first test of Espresso, which was a MVP of a new platform and a new product. During that same period, we tried to reskin our legacy payment flow. That effort on our old system failed after 6 months, which was really disappointing. During that time, we were using pull methodology, meaning we were building something new on our new platform. This was after we did Espresso. We were building something new on our platform, and as soon as we needed a capability, we would build that. That actually became quickly overwhelmed. We ended up having more things to build and needing them more quickly than we were able to build them. So it was a nice idea from Lean, but it didn't work out very well for us. We rebuilt the back office, same as the previous. That was actually a mistake because we didn't have the right people or the ideas to make something better. And so it inherited a lot of the problems, even though it was written on a completely new platform. And we created Chopin, which is a pun on shopping, and a pun on shop, which was the vertical that we rebuilt. So insurance for shop owners. As if we needed rapid insurance product iteration, only later did the business start using that ability to rapidly iterate on the product. So we were thinking ahead so that the platform was ready for what we wanted to do as a business. A bit more on the replatforming. Yeah, I mentioned we rebuilt the shop product from the ground up. We also then subsequently rebuilt the professionals product from the ground up. However, pressure from our investors forced us to port our existing business insurance, and we also skipped building a customer account. So, that led to some people going, oh, well, what's the advantage of Agile if you had to reduce scope? Well, the advantage of Agile is we had the ability to reduce scope instead of lose our jobs, say. That could have been a much worse outcome. And during that period, we started getting too agile. Projects that took longer than a week were suddenly too long. We were getting so agile that we couldn't do anything important. And that meant that tech debt started to accumulate on the new platform. And at one point, I got scared. I thought we're going to have built a platform, and a year or two later, we'll have gone into legacy mode and literally can't change it anymore if we don't start paying down that tech debt. And also during that time, the team was growing, so we split into more and more teams. So the next speed up was the lean startup speed up. So another 4x speed up. So from the time I joined the company to the time to when we finished this, we'd achieved a 64x speed up. Now that sounds ridiculous. It sounds not believable. And that makes sense. And I can't say I measured it, completely accurately in every way. And every time you pocket something, you go, okay, well, now we're in this new level. We don't go back. But the fact is we were able to get value out the door at a much, much greater pace. So, however, it wasn't easy. The first attempts were quite awkward. We believe we will revolutionize the world was a typical hypothesis that people would come up with, which is, of course, not testable. So you can't really test it scientifically. I won't go too much into lean startup methodology, but suffice it to say, it's about testing and showing evidence in small ways so that you can move forward with confidence. And that's called the build, measure, learn loop. That had to be enforced because people wanted to constantly just do it. They wanted to avoid having to do hypotheses and measures, avoid having to test value. And another interesting thing at the time, there were no consultancies that could help us. So this was fundamentally something we had to learn ourselves the hard way. And then, a little more on how we prioritized our methodology. Pre-lean startup was this feature is worth X to prioritize. And then we would build it once it had been prioritized. And then after, we wouldn't know what it was worth and be like, it's the internet, mate. We just didn't know. Maybe it did work. Maybe it didn't work. It was very hard to understand. Post-lean startup, our prioritization methodology was first to determine what is it actually worth, then build it. So that allowed us to avoid doing things. Now, that doesn't solve all problems. We did a set of iterative changes on our trade selector over a year that gave us a 10-point uplift, which is huge in terms of conversion rate, 10-point conversion rate uplift. But it took a year. And some of the simple changes, the early changes were instead of a customer going to the wrong product, they started going to the right product, but we hadn't built that product yet. So we got people, instead of buying the wrong product, they bought no product because there was nothing there. So sometimes those changes don't go in the positive direction, but something earlier up higher in the funnel might go in the right direction. People are getting the right product. The other thing, we moved from opinions to hypotheses and tests, meaning no hippos. For those of you that don't know what a hippo is, it's a highest paid person's opinion. At times I fall into that category in a meeting, but we really try to avoid opinions and try to have data as the basis for us choosing what to do. Our data team from this time forward was working like a development team. That's relatively common now, but at the time it was really different. And data became a first-class citizen and a major investment point. And that led to data-driven decision-making. The next phase was customer-centric. And here we started customer testing. So before this, all of the data we'd used was really focused on our internal metrics data that was flowing through our system. After this, we would go out and speak to customers. So we got a consultancy involved that organized customer interviews. And the term is get out of the building, get yourself out there, understand customers, speak to them. And senior execs in the company watched customers using our product, calling our contact center, and then seeing where it went wrong. And it's incredibly different between listening to a call next to one of your colleagues and watching a customer and the way their face reacts and the way they're struggling to get help on the other side. And so what might look customer driven from one side can really not be customer driven when you're seeing it through the customer's eyes. So really getting customer needs driven. There were some challenges here as well. It turns out it is very hard to get the customer in the room. There's a perceived conflict between cash and revenue and the customer needs. We also at the time didn't have a clear or strong enough product focus. And I mentioned the perceived tension. And it can also be hard to understand what the customer will do versus what they tell you. This is quite famous. And then one of the things I heard quite often was, if you just do what the customer says, they'll want everything for free, and then you don't have a business. That's a misunderstanding of customer. The customer can tell you what they want, and then you need to understand what they need so that you can deliver back to them what they need, which might be different than what they want. There's the famous Henry Ford quote, which you probably all know, but I'll repeat it anyway, which is, if you ask our customers, they'll ask for a faster horse. The next step is to say, what do they really need when they have a faster horse? What's the job to be done? The job to be done is to move faster. And a car is better at that than a horse. And you can't really speed up horses, can you? Then we moved to product organization. So during that entire time, we always had insurance product managers. They were developing the insurance product. They were creating something that could be sold online. At this time, we started having digital and insurance product managers, as well as UX designers, but we did struggle to get traction. So we brought in a head of product to build out that team and professionalize it. Now we had a bigger product team than we'd ever had before. That allowed us to start to move things along that had been very difficult to do because it was very feature driven. We began to focus on core and adjacent innovation. Again, I won't go into the core, adjacency, and seed model, but suffice to say, started looking at new products that we didn't do today. And there's one challenge, which is the product manager the CEO of the team? And the reality is that doesn't quite work. The product manager is also an individual contributor. And really the best ideas combine between business experts and product managers, UX specialists, and tech. And the product manager is certainly the coordinator and at the center of that. But that's one of those questions that comes and goes. Then we went international into the US from the UK. And that meant we had to add language, currency, time zone into our platform. We chose to stay on a single platform. We felt that was one of the major advantages we had as a business. And that led to many differences and many similarities, a lot of questions around what is global, what is local. We really had to start thinking about teams of teams, because there ended up being two teams focused on the same thing, but in two different geographies, and including multiple management teams. And that poses a lot of challenges when you're sitting on one single core platform. Rapid growth and investment came in, and also those two markets were at different stages of their development. So the US was a true startup. We had no products in market, whereas the UK was at a relatively mature, still growing 25 to 30% year on year, which is really good in the insurance market, but much more mature. So let me talk a bit more about scale. And we're in this scale phase for all intents and purposes, but we're beginning to componentize our architecture to handle those different business models, the larger team. We've really professionalized the onboarding of our team members. We're now about 220 in tech and data. Distributed teams became a real thing. Well, now everyone's a distributed team, with COVID, but that's something that we were ahead of the game, which actually led to us being able to, we were entirely cloud-based, entirely able to work remotely. So when COVID came along, we were instantly able, it took us one day to move our entire operation without a hitch into a distributed and remote team. This time we began nearshoring to boost our internal hiring. And one of the big focuses is, as we grow, how do we keep our culture and our agility? And now we're really focused on repeatable innovation, and that means using Lean Canvas to help us develop better business models, but fill them up with risky assumptions, things we can test, which then turn into assumption trees, risky assumption tests, otherwise known as MVPs in some circles. And that has allowed us to start to build new products that we've never done before. And we're in that process, and we're learning, and we're getting better at that. But that process is really working. Now you have cross-functional teams, which we've had all along, but the weight of focus of these cross-functional teams is less on technology and product and more on a broad cross business. And the center focus often isn't on technology or product. And the final thing I want to say is empowerment is not autonomy. So people talk a lot about two pizza teams and give them full autonomy, but the reality is they need to be connected with empowerment. Need to be connected with management teams, spending time with those teams. So if there's a question that needs to be answered, it can be answered very quickly. And so in our case, we do that with what we call pivot, persevere, kill meetings, where the management team members understand progress on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, and then can help those teams to make decisions or answer deep, important questions. I was in a meeting today where we answered a big question that could have wrapped up that team, and we were just able to take a quick vote. Turned out there was consensus, they could move on, and that empowers that team to solve problems quickly. And that is it. I think that was 20 minutes, and which is the time I had allotted. So yes, thank you very much. And I think we have some time for questions. And Jonathan, you're going to give me those questions, right?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Lucas. Really, really interesting to hear the journey of Simply Business. And we'll start off with Fernando, who asked, so you managed to achieve 4 times speed up. I wondered if this translated to 4 times value delivery.
So I think at that time, it was like for like, right? So the value of the things that was delivered at 1x speed were then delivered at 4x speed. And I think, it probably came up a bit later, but there were, increasing value had a very, very big impact, which we got through lean startup methodology.
Next question, Julia asked, what were the biggest challenges around repeatable innovation?
So there's a number of big challenges. So one is it's a new methodology and most people aren't familiar with it. So you really have to think about how you're going to train people up, and it can be bumpy at first. And, members of that team might be skeptical. So you spend the time to help them understand, but you need someone who's done it before, or at least understands what you're trying to do, because every team is different and how they work is different. But typically we've been seeing in about 2 weeks time period, teams start to get a rhythm and are doing it well. But we're on our, we've done this many times. And so that's why, that's why that's started to work well.
Fantastic. Well, unfortunately, due to gremlins in the system, Lana's unable to do the second talk, which is a bit unfortunate. But we'll definitely invite her back for a later date. I'd like to thank Lucas from Simply Business, who's given time out of his busy schedule to come speak to the Agile Roundabout. And of course, I'd like to thank you guys who have been watching at home and following us right the way through 2020. We've just got just one more question has just come in, Lucas, so we'll just squeeze that one in before we end. So David says, can you talk more about how you see the role of product management in the future?
Wow, that's an interesting question. I think that, I don't know if I've really opined about the future. I think product managers need to really understand the business really well, but they also need to understand that they can't understand everything, and so bring in the right people at the right moment. So I think the product manager's role is to be really expert in all the different disciplines of product, which, fundamentally discovery and understanding customers, and being able to bring together UX, user research, business nous, to for lack of another word, the ability to manage stakeholders and bring those all together with tech, with in our case with insurance. And I think one of the challenges that product managers have is that need for deep business expertise. In some cases, not possible. You can imagine a product manager in a healthcare business not really being able to be an expert on medical safety. In our case, they can't really be an expert on regulatory, nor so you have to have all those different disciplines as part of it. So it's there's a an ability to stand back and take yourself out of the equation to be able to bring all those things together and then come up with amazing solutions. So that's, I don't know if that's a great answer, but that's kind of the future direction. I think technology is moving really quickly. And even my role as chief technology officer, I can't keep up with all the technology. And so you can imagine, if you're a digital business, to ask product managers to be up to speed on absolutely everything isn't feasible either. So that's probably the biggest thing. I don't know if that's a change. I think that's core to how product managers operate, but it's a really tough job. And I think we need to be careful not to inflate the scope of that role too much to make it impossible to do, so that every product manager is a proper unicorn. And I think that's where some product transformations have gone wrong in companies, which is when you expect the product manager to solve all problems all the time. And I think about it from a management point of view. If you outsource to teams your deepest business problems, you've kind of not done your job as a manager. That's not empowerment. That's sending people off to fail.
We got a few further questions. So Milland asks, while boosting the delivery speed to 64 times, how did you manage with the motivation of your workforce? Well,
to be honest, that is quite motivating, right? Because they weren't working harder. So during this entire time, from a company point of view, we were really determined that people had work-life balance. That in fact, it's very important because it means people that do have childcare responsibilities or a variety of other or even caring responsibilities are able to work with us. So by being I'm deeply against the sort of programmer culture that you sometimes hear about, from various players in the industry, where if you don't work 80-hour weeks, there's no you're just not good enough, or the 10x program, or some of those other things. I think they're false. They're simply false, or at least those companies sometimes succeed, but they don't meet my values and our values. And so we got that 64x without 64x people's time, which obviously isn't possible. We got it through operating more effectively, and that would be my recommendation to you when you're thinking about how can you get ridiculous increases. It's not hours worked. There's no chance that hours worked will get you a 64x increase. It simply can't.
We've got a few more questions. So Aiton asks, how do you increase the communication between management teams and product teams, and how do you secure agility among the management teams?
Yeah, you guys are giving me some tough questions. So but I'll tackle them. I'm there. So how do you increase communication between management teams and product teams? I mentioned one, which is, so the communication between management teams and product teams needs to be more frequent and more, how do you put it, more aligned the faster you're moving. So when you're in a what we call a BML phase, and a phase where you're discovering, you're reducing risks, and you're hoping to reduce 2 or 3 risks a week, that are risks that might make you choose not to do the thing. You need management there every week. That's what we find. We have a 1-hour PPK meeting, we call it, Pivot, Persevere, Kill. At the end of that meeting, so what happens is the team every week goes through what progress they've made on the risks, what they're focusing on, what's going well, what's not going well. And then at the end of that, everyone on the call, which includes the management team members, then votes, should we persevere, meaning continue, you're doing great, everything's perfect as a team. Pivot, which means there's a change we need to make. Sometimes that pivot is, I'd just like a bit better reporting this way, or could you focus on X versus Y? And sometimes it is, we really need to rethink what we're doing. And kill would be, actually, this isn't working out. And we've had all of those. Kills are quite rare. Perseveres are probably the most common. But that weekly interaction in that really rapid phase means that we can answer questions that otherwise a team might spend a lot of time on. and that time could be wasted. So today we literally had one of those where we were saying, do we focus in this area or in this area? And the team was going to come back in 2 weeks' time or after Christmas and research it and justify it. And we were able to ask the stakeholders, what do you feel? And they said, oh yeah, just choose this one. And so that all that work was eliminated. And that's what I mean by keeping an increasing management team and product teams. Now, when you're doing more, building features or at least solving problems that are slightly bigger in scope and take longer, you're more in a build phase or an explore phase, we call it, where you're understanding how you're going to build something rather than whether or even if you can make it work, then that connection can be a little bit looser. So in that case, we have bi-weekly stakeholder meetings that talk about a group of teams, and that's still a work in progress. But I think the main thing I would say is, be clear that management teams shouldn't be sitting, the way I put it, they shouldn't be standing in judgment on the delivery of teams, but should be working with teams and ensuring that teams are on the right track on a frequent basis so that you don't have a big explosion at the end. And then the second part of the question, how do you secure agility among management teams? I think this is I could call it a culture thing. I could call it a directive thing. Fundamentally, you need to believe that agility and being flexible and making decisions frequently rather than on long-term timescales is something you want to achieve as a company, and that's got to come from the top, or at least be supported from the top. So if your management doesn't believe that's possible, it isn't. So that agility needs to be something that you want to have as a company, that you believe is critical to your success. And if you do that, then the agility will come. And there are many ways to get there, right? You can have retrospectives, you can have, there's any number of different ways. But fundamentally, it's about that mindset and saying, this is something we will be. This is something we demand. And, similar to the speed up question where, that's a decision that we're not going to work people super hard to get, marginal productivity gains, but that we are going to get the best out of people and keep their motivation up. Because the question there was motivation. Now, I sort of dodged the motivation question, by the way, but the motivation's really high when you're succeeding. So succeeding is great. People love to succeed. A growing company is a great place to be motivated. And then, look out for your workforce, look out for their interests, what they're looking for, and keep them in mind, and then that's, I think those are the cores of motivation.
And our last question for this evening comes from Andrew, who says, you mentioned the challenge of keeping culture and agility. What are the actions you want most people to focus their time on in order to ensure that journey continues?
Thanks, Andrew. So again, a tough question. Thanks for that. Andrew works at Simply Business, so he's testing me out. But you want people to be trying things and solving things on a small scale all the time. So one of the big questions we're facing right now is we've all gone remote. Has that killed our culture? No, it hasn't, but people are definitely feeling the difficulties of being remote, being locked up, not being able to see their colleagues, and that's not easy. And guess what? I don't have any answers. Nobody has any answers. So, we're trying different means and modes. We just had our 1 hour festive gala Christmas party where, we had a variety of different ways of keeping people excited. What's interesting is that it changed. Before this, we had in-person parties, and that was how we kept people together. And then, on a day-to-day basis, people would, be together with each other. A lot of those things are gone. We have to adjust, but we don't know the exact answers is the best thing. So the focus, just to come back to the question, is focus your time on trying things and seeing if they work, being agile. And once we find things that do work, then let's get more people on board, like we did in the early days. We had, within 3 months, we were able to move the entire team to Agile. but that started with one team on one sprint. And I think that's the same thing for these kind of things. We know where we want to be, and now we need to try things that keep us going in that direction.